Darren Kimpton. So let's just assume you were thinking about burglaring a house to steal stuff. One of the very first things you'd try to do is find the perfect target, right? Like an empty house or something. Well, a man by the name of Darren Kimpton did the direct opposite of that. This guy was so unlucky that he chose a house full of police officers. Yep, a house full of law enforcement officers. What actually happened was that the house he had selected had already been burgled earlier in the evening, so the police officers were there to investigate. Just imagine the shock that would be on everyone's face when they literally caught Kimpton breaking into a house red-handed. You'd think that after such a catastrophic failure, Darren would call it a night, but no, our boy Darren is nothing if not committed to bad decisions. Earlier that same evening, he had tried breaking into another house, but bungled it so badly he left blood at the scene. That's right, Darren managed to cut himself during his first attempt and left DNA evidence behind, making him one of the easiest criminals to track. Derek Mosley. You see, in everything you want to do in life, planning is very, very important, especially if you're trying to pull off a crime. It is literally essential that every detail be well thought through in advance. But a man named Derek Mosley didn't place very high importance on these things before he decided to rob a freaking gun store. Let's pause for a second and let that sink in. He planned to rob a store where the merchandise is literally weapons. Not a bakery, not a flower shop, a place where the employees are armed, the customers are armed, and even the cash register might have a Glock tucked away for emergencies. Well, Derek struts into the store holding a baseball bat like it's Excalibur. That's right, a baseball bat. Not a gun, or a knife at least. He quite literally brought a stick to a gunfight, and somewhere in his brain this made perfect sense. He immediately starts smashing a glass display case and starts grabbing handguns, but here's where his genius plan starts unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. First of all, this guy didn't think about the fact that breaking glass might make a lot of noise, so the employees and customers quickly realized what was happening. Well, the store manager and every other person there with a gun just calmly pulled out their firearms, and at this point, criminal mastermind Derek is outnumbered by more guns than an action movie set. Derek now realizes he's in the middle of the world's worst heist because he's holding a baseball bat in a room full of people who could turn him into Swiss cheese in about 0.5 seconds. The sheer comedy of the moment is almost Shakespearean. By the time the police arrived, Derek had already surrendered without a fight. Well, it's not like he had any other choice. Mark Smith. Picture this. It's a crisp autumn evening in the town of Wigan, England. Mark Smith, a 33-year-old with the brain power of an unplugged toaster, makes the executive decision to embark on his own personal heist. Now, you'd think this guy would have properly arranged his tools, or at least mapped out the location of his so-called heist, right? Well, Mark here just decides to wing it. So, armed with nothing but overconfidence and a severe lack of foresight, Mark prepared for his grand operation and set his sights on robbing a local bar after hours. But there was one glaring issue. He didn't bother bringing any proper tools. Instead, on his way to the bar, Mark spotted a brick lying on the street and decided it was the perfect instrument for his plan. Yes, because nothing screams criminal genius like a random piece of masonry picked up on a whim. Under the cover of night, Mark approached the bar and prepared to make his move. He hurled the brick at the glass door with the enthusiasm of someone who's skipped physics class entirely. Unfortunately for Mark, the door was made of reinforced shatterproof glass designed specifically to withstand such amateur attempts, so the brick just ricocheted back with impressive force, striking Mark square in the face. Imagine a boomerang returning to its sender, but instead of being caught gracefully, it delivers a knockout blow. Mark dropped to the ground, out cold, as if the universe itself decided to teach him a lesson about bad decision-making. Moments later, the bar owner arrived after hearing the commotion, but instead of finding shattered glass and stolen goods, they stumbled upon Mark, sprawled on the pavement in front of the bar, unconscious, with the offending brick lying incriminatingly nearby. It was as though Mark had gift-wrapped himself for the authorities, complete with a self-inflicted injury to seal the deal. Klaus Schmidt. The year is 1995 in Berlin, and everybody is busy going about their usual schedules. But then Klaus Schmidt decides that his own itinerary for the day would include bank robbery. So, armed with a pistol and the kind of confidence that only comes from watching too many action movies, this guy walks into the bank probably feeling unstoppable. But there's one teensy-weensy problem. He's stone deaf. Now, being deaf isn't an issue. The issue is that Klaus didn't realize how important listening is to a robbery. Well, he gets into the bank, waves his pistol like a madman and makes the usual announcement. "This is a robbery, everybody get down!" even though he can't hear himself. Now, the bank employees were already suspicious because he just kept repeating the same answer to literally everybody, but it wasn't until one brave employee asked Klaus if he needed a bag for the money, and he responded with, "You're damn right it's a real gun," their suspicions were confirmed. This guy couldn't hear anything. As the employees comply and start loading cash into a bag, one of them discreetly presses the silent alarm, and Klaus can't hear the alarm blaring through the bank. Customers are sneaking out the back, police are assembling outside, and Klaus is just standing there probably thinking he's crushing this robbery gig. The police, now in position, used a megaphone to command Klaus to drop his weapon and surrender, but of course, Klaus couldn't hear a word, and it wasn't until an officer physically tapped Klaus on the shoulder that he finally realized his flawless heist had been foiled. With nowhere to run and no excuses left to offer, Klaus was arrested on the spot. After all, there's no point in resisting when you don't hear yourself lose. In a funny twist of events, Klaus had the audacity to sue the bank for apparently abusing his disability. The butt drug mule. So, our main character here was a wannabe Pablo Escobar who decided that his butt-clenching skills were one of a kind. Well, the man, named Kadar Abdullahi, tried to smuggle the drugs by stuffing them up his rear end. Now, this tactic is not new, but this genius managed to botch it so badly that he made headlines. You see, instead of carefully concealing small, manageable packets like most drug mules, this guy decided to go big or go in and shove 62 balloons filled with cocaine where the sun doesn't shine. Yes, 62! Imagine your most regrettable Taco Bell binge multiplied by 1,000. Now, as if the 62 balloons weren't enough trouble, our hero started sweating profusely and looking very, very guilty at the airport security line. He was suspiciously clenching his ass cheeks like he just did the world's worst leg day, so naturally this caught the attention of officers. However, when they brought him in for questioning, he just lied and said he was full of shit instead. But since there was no metal detector beep or anything, the security had no reason to suspect him. Well, during the flight, one of the balloons decided to burst, and this was literally like a cocaine bomb detonating inside his body. He immediately started to panic and spiral into a full-blown meltdown, flailing like he was auditioning for Dancing with the Drug-Induced Stars. Flight attendants had no idea what was happening. All they knew was this man was sweating, shaking, and probably smelling like regret. The flight crew had to make an emergency landing because our butt smuggler was now overdosing mid-flight. Thankfully, the paramedics were called in, and the doctors were able to successfully remove all 61 remaining balloons. Needless to say, our clumsy mule was arrested immediately after recovering. Mohammed Ashan. Terrorists are not exactly known for their intellect at the best of time. They blow themselves up deliberately, spend much of their time preaching nonsense that nobody understands, and very rarely get dates. Even so, Afghan Taliban commander Mohammed Ashan has to represent one of the least cerebral of these operatives. It all started when the United States got intel that Ashan was involved in plotting IED attacks against US and Afghan forces. So they set out to catch him, and officials targeted the Paktika province, where Ashan and his insurgent followers operated, with a flurry of wanted posters. Basically, the flyers promised informants $100 for any information that led to the commander's capture. Well, in 2012, something even comedy writers wouldn't ever imagine happened. Ashan saunters into a checkpoint in the Sarhauza district and handed himself over and tried to claim the $100 bounty. This guy was literally clutching a wanted poster with his own mugshot and essentially demanding payment for his own capture. The police officers were unsurprisingly absolutely stunned. Imagine the look on their faces as they realized this wasn't a joke or some undercover sting operation. This man was dead serious. They even double-checked the poster and ran a DNA test to confirm. Unsurprisingly, Ashan was immediately arrested, and his arrest became the stuff of legend among law enforcement. Even US officials were baffled, calling his actions a gift from the heavens. One officer reportedly called him the Taliban's version of the office clown. Ruben Zarate. It's a chilly morning in 2008 in Chicago, Illinois, and Ruben Zarate woke up feeling inspired. Not by a motivational quote or a sense of purpose, but by the sheer fact that today is the day he's finally going to rob a muffler shop. Yes, a muffler shop, because why rob a bank when you can aim for less money and more grease? So, with a gun, he walks into the shop ready to make history in the Dumbest Criminal Fails Hall of Fame. You see, in the muffler shop, they always locked their money in a safe, and apparently only the store manager had the code. But guess what? The manager wasn't around at the time of the robbery. Now, you'd probably expect Ruben to call their bluff or just call it a day and go home, right? Well, our guy here had other plans. Ruben decides to drop his personal phone number for them so that when the manager comes back, they could give him a call. This criminal mastermind literally handed over his contact info like he was networking at a business conference. Worst still, he then threatened them to have the money packaged and ready so when he returns, he'll just come pick up the bags. Well, the employees obviously called the police office, who just came down to the shop, and then called Ruben to tell him the manager had arrived and the cash was ready. Then they waited to see if Ruben would actually return. Well, surprise, surprise, the man did. He was arrested on the spot and immediately taken to jail. Bird-brained prank. You've probably had one of those nights where you indulged in one too many shots of whiskey and ended up doing the most embarrassing things. However, two Welsh tourists decided that singing naked or telling embarrassing stories about each other was too basic. So these guys named Rhys Owen Jones, 21, and Kerry Mules, 20, from South Wales, broke into the park on Queensland Gold Coast after a night of heavy drinking and swam with the dolphins, let off a fire extinguisher in the shark enclosure, and then stole a penguin called Dirk. Well, when they woke up the next day, hungover and with the flightless bird in their apartment, they tried their incompetent best to care for him by feeding him and putting him in the shower. Obviously, that didn't work. The two then later released Dirk into a canal, and that's when they were spotted by locals who called the police. A magistrate fined them with 1,000 Australian dollars, which is the equivalent of 637 pounds at the time each, and warned them to drink a little less vodka. Thankfully, poor Dirk was safely rescued and returned to SeaWorld after his untimely kidnapping. Umar Mirza. Even the most dumb criminals know that leaving a trail of incriminating evidence can land you in jail fast. But Umar Mirza obviously missed that entire chapter in the criminal book he read. Because why, in God's name, would this 26-year-old man decide to apply for a job at the store he was planning to rob the very next day? Basically, Umar walked into the Paddy Power betting shop in Birmingham, England, and pointed a gun at the employee at the cash register, threatening to shoot if he didn't start stuffing dollar bills into a bag. Well, the employee, absolutely terrified, complied and emptied both the cash register and safe, and Umar walked away with £16,000. Now, instead of just trying to get out without doing anything stupid, this guy, in a fit of happiness, prematurely removed his mask as he was about to leave the shop and exposed his face to the ever-watchful CCTV cameras outside. Now, this is where the whole situation gets even more stupid. You see, on a normal day, it would have taken the police at least weeks to identify who the robber was. But because Umar had come in the day before to submit his CV, the manager immediately recognized him. To make matters worse, this Umar guy also had a gambling addiction and would visit the store regularly to bet, so he was also identified as a regular customer. Well, all the manager had to do was just hand over Umar's resume to the authorities, and when the police searched his home, they found all the evidence they needed. The imitation firearm, the betting slip, and the bag in which he transported the cash. He was arrested and sentenced to 6 years in jail. Charles Ray Fuller. Charles Ray Fuller probably thought that the motto, all for one and one for all, probably applied to people's cash too. Because why the hell did this guy think that walking into a bank with a fake check of $360 billion was the fastest way to get rich? Well, that's exactly what he did in 2008. To put this in perspective, $360 billion rivals the annual revenue of most Fortune 500 company. Now, pause and imagine being that bank teller. You're used to people cashing paychecks or withdrawing a few $100. Then this guy comes in with a piece of paper claiming he's richer than Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and the entire GDP of a small country combined. Like, why would he even think they'd believe him? Even if it were real, did he think the teller would just whip out their billionaire bills drawer and hand it over? According to Charles, the check was allegedly from his girlfriend's mother, Paula Prettyman, but when they called her, she confirmed she had not issued any checks like that. The bank staff immediately flagged the check as fake because, shocker, banks are pretty good at spotting fraud. Instead of walking out with his imaginary billions, Charles found himself walking into police custody. When the cops arrived, they found not just the bogus check, but also a gun and some marijuana on him. Because if you're gonna commit check fraud, why not double down and bring more incriminating evidence to the party? Charles was arrested on charges charges of forgery, unlawful possession of a firearm, and possession of a controlled substance. He didn't get his billions, but he did get a lot of attention for being hilariously inept. Donald Pugh. Honestly, we are not to talk smack about anybody or on the intellect of individuals we don't know, but the truth about this particular matter is that Pugh might not be the smartest person in the room. For starters, this guy was already wanted by the police for failing to appear in court for his DUI cases, and was also a person of interest in another unrelated arson and vandalism case. And to be honest, those were just the few of his crimes that were being looked at. So the investigators decided to dig up a mugshot of the guy and post on Facebook just to see if they'd get any good leads or tips. What they did not expect, though, was that Pugh himself would contact them. Yeah, you heard that right. The wanted criminal contacted them himself because he didn't like the photo of him they put up. So he sent them a more current picture of himself that looked way better. He probably thought it was Tinder or something. As would be expected, he was arrested in Florida soon after, and the worst part is that his newest mugshot ended up being infinitely creepier than the first one.